Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bharti and welcome to TFR Insights, a show where we deep dive into cloud-native technologies, 5G, and open source technologies. And today we have with us once again Boris Renski, founder of Freedom 5. And today we are going to talk about Magma. It's an open source project that was created by Facebook. It was recently taken over by the Linux Foundation. Boris, first of all, it's great to have you back on the show. We have talked about Magma, but just to refresh the memories of our viewers, can you quickly explain what is Magma all about?
Sure. Thank you, Swapnil, for having me. So Magma is what's in the industry referred to a network core. But to really simplify it, when it comes to cellular networks, such as LTE or 5G networks, there are really two big components that comprise them. One is the actual radio, which is the piece that goes on the tower and radiates the signal. And that's what you see, everywhere around. And then behind each radio, there is software that effectively aggregates all of these radios, that manages who can connect to the radio, who can't, et cetera, and makes this, many of these radios into one network. So that software in the industry is generally referred to as the network core. And Magma is the kind of a new and I would argue somewhat unique and forward-looking implementation of that network core that is also open source under Apache 2 license.
Why was Facebook working on something like Magma?
Good question. So Facebook is interested in getting as many people connected to the internet as possible, because at this point, pretty much everybody who, has good connectivity, chances are has Facebook in some incarnation, be it the Facebook proper or WhatsApp or Instagram or whatnot. So the more people actually have connectivity to the internet, the better it is for Facebook, the more users they get. So they are very much interested in investing in various projects that dramatically bring the cost of connectivity down. And one of the big issues with the cellular, LTE and 5G connectivity today is that it's largely dominated by a handful of incumbent vendors like Ericsson, Nokia, Huawei, ZTE, that typically ship an integrated stack of everything. So first of all, that stack is expensive. Second of all, that hinders the innovation in the market, and it keeps things like very expensive. So disaggregating it and having a piece of software that is agnostic to the radio, that is open source, and that has a very low cost entry point is likely to make, connectivity in general much less expensive, which is why Facebook's interested in investing in it.
How critical is Magma to a lot of 5G initiatives? Of course, Freedom 5 is one of those initiatives. To talk about the importance of it in modern and future networks.
We think that with 5G, what we refer to as the Linux of the network core will emerge. The reason for it is because with 5G, we truly see for the first time the architecture where there's full disaggregation between hardware and software. Those verticalized stacks that I was talking about that come from Ericsson and Huawei and Nokia, they are kind of akin to the mainframes with Unix that were shipped by the likes of IBM and HP 25 years ago. So today with 5G, there is an officially kind of broadly accepted standard architecture where you have the software part of the network and you have the hardware. And this disaggregation is kind of like the most exciting part, I think, that's happening in 5G. So now some of the very expensive components of that network, which is the software network core, can be implemented in open source and made available to everybody.
As we saw in the traditional telecom space, where players were moving away from black boxes towards white boxes, they were leveraging a lot of commodity hardware, and then of course there were ONAP and a lot of open source projects that came out of companies like Verizon or AT&T, and then OpenStack. And back in the early days when you were part of Mirantis, you guys played a very big role in that transformation. So how much of this hardware aspect of 5G is still open source, or there is still a need to further commoditize it?
I think that today we're still at the tip of the iceberg. I think that everybody's been talking about 5G and everybody's been talking about software-driven networks for a long time, but in reality, when you look at the number of those networks that have been deployed in production, there is very few. So I think that we are just 1% into what we're about to see. In terms of production-bound adoption of this fully disaggregated hardware-software paradigm in the telecom industry. And I'm hopeful that projects like Magma are going to be front and center of it going forward.
Magma has been around for a while. A lot of there are incumbents, but there is also a lot of new players which are also coming up. And you created Freedom 5 because you saw a lot of potential there in the space. Now, Magma is kind of part of Linux Foundation, and Freedom 5 is going to be one of the founding members of the new body that will come out of it. So I have a couple of questions there, but I'll try to break them down one by one. First of all, is that how is this change going to affect the community around Magma? The way I see it is that Linux Foundation has become a kind of very neutral body, which also enables a lot of cross-pollination, because Linux Foundation has a lot of internal projects which are about networking, and then of course CNCF is there, so it allows to bring a lot of people from different industries which may not sit under the same umbrella for whatsoever reason. So what will be the direct impact of this change on the project and the community?
I think that just immediately after the move to the Linux Foundation has been announced, within a week, we've seen a pop to the tune of 25% of active users and contributors to the project. And the reason for it is, there's different type of open source there. There's the open source where there is a company that, builds some software and then they just happen to release the code in the open under permissive license for other people to adopt it. But it's, all of the know-how is inside of one company. And there are projects out there like Kubernetes, like OpenStack that are really kind of, they're not really about the licensing aspect of open source. They're about the collaboration and the community aspect of open source. And some pieces of software are, more likely to lend themselves very well to this kind of a community and collaboration development model. Typically, those are the pieces of software that are being used in the same way across, different organizations that perform effectively the same function, where there is not a lot of tie-in to the unique, business process or competitive position of one company. So, Linux is a good example. Kubernetes, like container orchestrators, is a good example. And just the whole cloud infrastructure, lower layers of infrastructure, a good example because everybody uses the Linux the same way. So Magma is very much along the lines of, this kind of a lower layer ubiquitous components. And that network core is a piece of software that all telecom operators building a cellular network will be using it more or less in the same fashion, particularly the user plane or data plane components of the network core. So now that it's moved from, officially kind of being this, Facebook-led but open source on GitHub project over to a completely neutral governance of the Linux Foundation, I think, we're going to see further growth and more people coming in and helping build it. And it's kind of like, like a runaway train. So that's I guess, the answer to the question.
Linux Foundation already has LF Networking, Edge, and IoT, which is headed by Arpit Joshipura. Is Magma going to become a kind of a new foundation in Linux Foundation? Or it will become part of that foundation? Because if you look at Linux Foundation, there is a lot of overlap that happens, and then a lot of consolidation happens. They have been consolidating a lot of their AI ML projects into one project. So since you are one of the founding members, so can you share some insights into that?
Yeah, of course, I can definitely share it. So, um, you know, open source politics are a complicated beast. And the less of those politics are on your path hindering your growth, the better. So for that specific reason, it's been a conscious decision that at this point in time, Magma is going to be effectively its own foundation. It's under the Linux Foundation umbrella. It's a nonprofit under the Linux Foundation umbrella, but it's separate from the LF networking. It's separate from ONF or whatever other things are happening out there. And the reason for it also in part is because already today there are other open source communities that have contributed some of the code and some of the effort into building of Magma. So Open Air Interface, for instance, which is a completely separate, foundation, Open Air Interface Alliance out of Europe, has been a very active contributor to Magma. They're not part of Linux, they're not part of LFN, they're not part of ONF, they're just their own thing. Telecom Infra Project is another independent body that primarily focuses on developing telecom standards and kind of adoption blueprints, have been contributing those blueprints to define what Magma roadmap should look like. Open Infra Foundation has been helping develop the basically the infrastructure and like the tooling behind how the code is being built. So there's a lot of communities already out there. And for that reason, taking Magma and putting it into the existing and somewhat unknown political dynamic within the LFN is not, probably the right decision at this point in time. So it's its own thing. It has its own technical council. It has its own board, and and it's going to traverse its own path, whatever that path will look like going forward.
A lot of people get confused, but I think this is a right approach because the way I look at Linux Foundation is that, projects can quickly move into the foundation without having to worry about that politics and bureaucracy. You can set it up, and then later on, a lot of mergers or consolidation can happen at the time, or you can retain your own. There are so many projects, but I think this does allow to kind of navigate through all that. I mean, you mentioned Open Infrastructure Foundation, which used to be OpenStack Foundation, and at one point they were seen as a competing projects, whatever it is. But, over time, things start falling in places. So I think this is the right approach to have these kind of projects, even if they look like overlap, because that you can resolve over time. You can choose. Some projects may actually move into I don't know what will be the name of the foundation, Magma Foundation or whatever it is, just like Kubernetes led to CNCF. So, but I think that is the right approach. This is very early days. Linux Foundation has very well laid out project governance policy. So I am assuming the same structure will be followed for this project as well. There are already a lot of members that are there. What is the next step that you are aware of that will be there for this foundation?
So, there are two kind of, and this has been the case with all the different foundations that I've been involved with. There is the path related to building the code, and there is the path related to building the industry momentum and getting the bigger vendors to adopt it and yada, yada, yada. So I know that the spirit within the Magma Foundation is to really focus on the code and the customers and use cases. And this is why, I've been very bullish about, ultimately Magma becoming this winner in the, open source network core race. Because the approach and the general mentality, I think, with respect to everybody involved in the project is like, let's not built off of high level specs or big vendors that come in with their, interfaces or whatever. Let's look at the customers and the people that are actually using the product now. Let's focus at the types of features that they need. Let's focus at what if we build this feature, how many more towers they'll be able to roll out using Magma platform. And let's prioritize our roadmap and just continue pushing with that mentality in mind. And then if you stick to that mantra, the business development piece will kind of come in by itself, because ultimately you'll build the product that works and is the most robust. And I think that this is kind of the priority going forward. So, we're kind of in a neutral setting now. We have, at least several hundred users that are using it like in production with, thousands of towers deployed. We understand what are the key features that are missing that we need to implement. So we're very much focusing on the roadmap, getting those features in, and, the ecosystem will kind of follow.
As you mentioned earlier also about the way you experienced a kind of a spike in interest after it was announced that the Magma is going to the next foundation. We have been talking about 5G, it's early days, but do you also see that this move will also kind of accelerate the not only the adoption but development and the emergence of an ecosystem around 5G as well, because Linux Foundation does do a lot of work to push a lot of things forward?
Yeah. So, I mean, Magma squarely there in the 5G space. So, it supports, 5G radios already today. And I think the bigger vision now that, it's under the umbrella of a neutral entity, which is a Linux Foundation, is that there's going to be a lot of startups and vendors alike that are participating in the 5G ecosystem that'll come in and, first of all, help build Magma, but also potentially down the road, maybe seed additional complementary projects around, radio management, things like, in CBRS, there's this, I think, much needed component called a domain proxy, which sits between the Spectrum access system and a radio, which lends itself very well to an open source development model. So Magma is really like an anchor point at this point, kind of like Nova was an OpenStack or Kubernetes was in CNCF for this new movement. And going forward, we see a whole bunch of projects and vendors coming in and building a true end-to-end open source stack that doesn't just necessarily focus on the data plane of the network core like Magma does.
Freedom Fi is already, one of the founding members of this project. You have been actively involved in a lot of open source projects earlier also. So can you talk about your own involvement as not only just Freedom Fi, but also Boris Renski into the project and the ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think that our involvement is going to heavily leverage the experience of the team that spans the cloud infrastructure space with things like OpenStack and Kubernetes, and will look similar to what we have done in the past. And that with any open source community or project is really kind of this innovation sandbox, and then you ultimately to make it usable for an adopter, a customer, you need to have a vendor that will package it, bug fix it, attach a roadmap to it, provide, phone number or, ticketing system to access for the end user, and just like, be the kind of a commercialization entity behind it. So from the commercial standpoint, our plan is exactly that, to basically, for Freedom Fi to become to Magma what Mirantis has become to, OpenStack and Kubernetes, in that we'll have an opinionated, productized distribution of Magma that's available for anybody to, actually enable them to build an LTE or a 5G network. And from the standpoint of involvement with Foundation community, of course, we'll continue on our path of evangelism, like, thanks to you, we're doing right now, Swapnil, as well as contributing to the code upstream and helping take the customers' requirements that we see in the field, bring them to the community, and actually, invest ourselves in the R&D and then actually development of those features in the open source.
The way I see it, you started Freedom Fi, I think, a few months ago last year, and now suddenly there is a foundation. I mean, the project that you rely on has moved out as an independent. Which the beauty of these projects is that everybody gets, whoever contributes heavily gets the say. One company does not dictate and dominate. So I see things are working out positively in Freedom Fi's direction also. And we did an earlier interview of MuralNet where you are helping them move forward with that kind of initiative as well. So I do see a lot of potential there, and I would love to talk to you again. I mean, of course, you are always welcome whenever something is happening. So first of all, congratulations for this foundation, and I look forward to talk to you again as more things work in this space. Thank you.
Yeah, Swapnil, thank you very much, and thank you so much for your continued interest. Always great talking to you.